All right, and we are back. 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 Welcome. All right, and we are back. And today we're back with another video. This is actually going to be a video on the religious topic again. We're back to it, guys. It is Sunday, and I found this video, saw it as an interesting video to go over by Jake W. This is called "Who Wrote the Bible?" So. Sound like an interesting topic. I feel like it was written by a collective of people, not just like one individual person, but this is what we have Jake W for. So guys, this is my first video from Jake. If you haven't already, if you're new to his channel like I am, make sure you like, comment, subscribe to him. I'm sure he's making incredible content here. He makes something really good, at least really great thumbnails, because I'm checking it out. But no, I know this video is going to be great. I haven't seen it yet, but I have a great feeling about it. And guys, if you're not familiar with me, make sure you also like, comment, and subscribe to this channel, because you know what, if you're watching this video now, you probably should. I'm probably going to say some really great stuff, and then you can also look back to all my other videos and see all the other good stuff I say. Look how charming I am. Look at me. I'm doing the thing. So yeah, guys. With that being said, make sure you pay attention here, because this is a serious part. If you're not familiar with the channel, if you don't like, comment, and subscribe to this channel, more importantly subscribe, YouTube will come through that door, and they will. Who wrote the Bible?
So the first 5 books of the Bible are Genesis, which covers the creation of the world and the lives of the ancestors of Israel. Okay. Then Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, which concern the life of the prophet Moses, his leadership of the Israelites, and the laws revealed to him by God.
Okay, I'm familiar with this story so far. Okay.
Together, these books are known as the Torah, meaning the law in Hebrew. Though in this video, I'm going to call it by its other common name, the Pentateuch, which is just Greek for 5 books. The Pentateuch is traditionally believed to have been written entirely by Moses himself under God's guidance. However, there are some issues to this idea. There are a number of passages in the Pentateuch which suggest it was composed after the death of Moses.
Hold on. Let's make sure
There are a number...
Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time, Canaanites were in the land, implying the author lived in a time when the Canaanites were no longer in the land, which would have been after Moses' lifetime. Okay, that's a good point there. Look at Jake over here. Okay, these are the words in which Moses speaks to all Israel beyond the Jordan in the wilderness. In the Abram opposite Suf, between Para, Tophel, Laban, Hazroth, and Diazab. Okay. Interesting names there. I like the names. I'm just not great at pronouncing them. So this is my fault here, guys. Don't blame my education system. This was actually my personal issue with pronunciations, All right. So what is that? What did I just read there? Let's read the red parts together, guys. Implying the author lived on the other side of the Jordan River, which Moses would never cross. Guys, these are the words which Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan in the wilderness. I guess that's implying that I guess it would be implying this is the message that he spread that went that far. and this is just kind of saying that this is how far as it went. But let's see.
Number of passages in the Pentateuch which suggest it was composed after the death of Moses, most notably Deuteronomy 34:5, which describes the death of Moses. On top of that, there are other...
Okay. That's pretty hard evidence right there. This is incredible evidence right here. Normally, people aren't able to continue doing things after they're dead, except one guy, He's a good guy, came back about 3 days later.
Other narrative quirks throughout each book that put the whole idea of a single author into question. There are several doublets, that is, a piece of information or story provided twice in the same text, often with differing details. In Genesis chapters 12 and 20, we see two stories where Abraham visits a foreign country and tells everyone that his wife Sarah is actually his sister. The king sees Sarah, says boyoyoyoing arf 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 awooga, and tries to take her as a wife. But then God exposes Abraham's lie before the false marriage can be consummated. This story even repeats a third time in chapter...
Yeah. So here's the interesting thing, because I actually reference this story a lot in my personal life on because I guess this is one of the more confusing stories to me within the Bible, is because the first time he does it, the king takes his wife after he told him it was his sister. But I'm pretty sure God instructed him to say, don't say this is my wife, say this is my sister. So they took him. She's so beautiful, and he kind of is regular looking guy, maybe even not handsome. And the king takes her, and before every night when the kings take the wife, they're not able to do anything, consummate anything. They're just they get a message from God explaining how they're going to lose everything in their kingdom, all their money, all the people, the kingdom itself burnt down, all the bad things are going to happen. And they get this message, and the next day they immediately return the wife, as well as give him gold, donkeys, stuff like that, resources. And after the third time, he becomes wealthy. It's an interesting story, but I'm always so what is the clear message on that? Because it almost feels like a religious scam in a way, where you're just okay, I know my wife is hot, people are gonna want her, so I'm gonna go in here, and obviously them being the type of people they are, they're gonna see her, they're gonna be, oh man, yeah, your wife is hot, bring her to the king. And then, he's going to be oh, well, she's actually not my wife. She's my sister, so you can take her, and then bam. Next day, return back, new wife. You also get some gold. You also get some resources. I mean, yeah, it's a great deal at the end of the day, but at the same time, I'm always I guess maybe for the kings, it's a lesson on hey, don't do this anymore. You can't just see every woman and then she's just yours, But what lesson is Abraham learning at the end of the day? And also, what trauma is she going through at the end of the day? What's his wife, Sarah? Is that his wife's name? I don't know. It's one of those stories where you're just there's a lesson in here. There's definitely a lesson in here. I just didn't understand it, This isn't a lesson that I feel directly affected me, but maybe it does. Maybe somebody in the comments, see if you can explain the lesson in that story. Let me know it.
Chapter 26 with Abraham's son Isaac and his wife Rebekah. Another doublet in Genesis is the story...
Rebekah, that was her name. I'm sorry, Sarah's out there. It's Rebekah's
story of how Jacob's name was changed to Israel. In chapter 32, Jacob, on his way to reunite with Esau, wrestles with an angel. Or maybe it was God, I don't know. After successfully pinning down his opponent, the divine being renames him Israel. But then in chapter 35, after Jacob brings his household to Bethel, God visits him and once again renames him Israel. In addition to redundancies in the form of doublets, there are also just flat-out contradictions. In Genesis 6, God tells Noah, quote, "Of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ship to keep them alive with you. Of the birds after their kind, of the livestock after their kind, of every creeping thing on the ground after its kind. 2 of every sort will come to you to keep them alive. But then in chapter 7, Noah gets different instructions. Quote, you shall take 7 pairs of every clean animal with you, the male and his female. Of the animals that are not clean, take 2, the male and his female. Also of all the birds of the sky, 7 and 7, male and female, to keep seed alive on the surface of all the earth. This is not an exhaustive list of all the issues. I'm actually...
I would say that's not like as much of a direct contradiction. That's more just like added detail to it, because you're still taking pairs. So you're still taking pairs. They're just saying, all right, now I needed to take 7 pairs. So he's still saying, I want you to take 2 of everything. Every creature, take 2 of them. But for the clean creatures, I want you to take multiple sets of 2. And I guess with that, it just explains the variety within the different animals. But, you know, you think of something like a pig. I feel like, aren't pigs kind of like universal? Like, you leave them out in the wild, they all turn into boars. There may be like certain sets of pigs. There may be like a few different looks of pigs. I don't know. I feel like pigs are kind of pigs. Like, pigs might just be the same all around the world. Somebody tell me differently, but I know like any pig can turn into a wild boar if you just like let it into the wild enough. But yeah, that's a good one. Hey, if somebody's a pigologist out there, drop in the comments. Let me know about the different varieties of pigs.
Bearing the lead on a couple more big ones in Genesis. But I hope it effectively shows that the Pentateuch is a problematic text if you try to read it as the work of a single author. Theologians have been well aware of this problem for literally thousands of years, and they've had to find ways of reconciling this with their beliefs regarding the authorship and authority of the Bible. However, in the wake of the European Enlightenment, many biblical scholars began to reject divinely inspired Mosaic authorship as a given, and instead turn to source criticism. Through analyzing the conflicting narrative threads within the text, a consensus emerged that the Pentateuch was actually the work of multiple authors, each recording versions of traditional legends from their time and place. These authors' works would later be compiled by a third party into the Pentateuch as it exists now. The most prominent model for the composition of the Pentateuch is that of the documentary hypothesis, which identifies 4 distinct voices throughout the text, each with their own narrative threads and other stylistic and thematic features which distinguish them from one another. There's the Yahwist source, known as J, named after its prominent use of God's personal name Yahweh, which was spelled with a J by the German scholars who identified the source, hence J instead of Y. The Elohist source, known as E, which in contrast favors the more generic term Elohim when referring to God. The name Yahweh doesn't show up in the E source until it's revealed to Moses in Exodus 3. The priestly source, known as P, named for its emphasis on ritual practices, the origins of religious sites, the genealogies of important figures, you know, stuff a priest would care about. P text is most prominent in sections of the Pentateuch concerning these subjects.
I'm sorry, guys. He said the P text. I think he should have made that one yellow.
And lastly, the Deuteronomist source known as D, which is only found in Deuteronomy and makes up the vast majority of that book, if not all of it. These sources can be most easily identified in sections with the most glaring contradictions, of which I will now present 2 examples from Genesis. Hold on though, I need to dig up the lead now. Most people born into Judeo-Christian tradition could give you a quick summary of the creation story told in Genesis 1 through 2, but few look at it critically enough to notice the problematic sequence of events that it presents. Genesis 1 starts with a featureless earth submerged in water. On day 1, God, through spoken command, creates light, then separates the light from the darkness, establishing day and night. On day 2, he creates the expanse of the sky, separating the earthly waters from the heavenly waters. Day 3, he raises dry land out of the sea, allowing vegetation to grow. Day 4, he creates the sun, moon, and stars and places them in the expanse so that time can be measured. Day 5, he populates the ocean with fish and the sky with birds, and finally on day 6 he creates land animals, last of all being humans, specifically a male and female formed in God's image. The next chapter starts on the 7th day where God rests, having finished all his work. But then on verse 4 we suddenly jump back in time and immediately... immediately run into confusion. Quote, "This is the history of the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they were created, in the day that Yahweh God made the earth and the heavens. No plant of the field was yet on the earth, and no herb of the field had yet sprung up, for Yahweh God had not caused it to rain on the earth. There was no man to till the ground." So at first it sounds like we've gone all the way back to day one, but then it describes the earth as a barren desert, which would have to mean we're somewhere in the middle of the third day after the formation of dry land, but before the appearance of plant life. God then creates Adam, the first man, by sculpting him out of soil and breathing life into his body, even though according to chapter 1, humans aren't supposed to show up till day 6 after several more stages of creation. Next, God plants the Garden of Eden for Adam to live in. He decides Adam should have a companion and now creates land animals and birds, two groups that in the previous chapter appeared on separate days but now seem to have been created simultaneously.
But wasn't he giving him control over the animals at that point? I just want to make sure. I'm not 100%. And wait, he's actually saying, okay, Yahweh God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper to be comparable to him." Out of the ground, Yahweh God formed every animal of the field and every bird of the sky and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. Whatever the man called every living creature would be his name. Okay. So I guess that's more of an interpretation, because I understand where I think I see where he's coming from with the issue, because he states it's at the out of the ground. Yahweh God formed every animal of the field and every bird of the sky and brought them to him to see his name. And the names given to all the livestock and the birds of the sky and every animal of the field, but the man was not found a helper comparable to him. I feel like he's presenting him all the animals. I don't know if he's necessarily creating them like at that moment. Like, I think they're already alive. Like, I think all the animals are already there, but he's like showing them. He's bringing them to him. The ones he can't bring to him, I think those are the ones he's forming, not like actually forming, but like representing in the form of clay to show him what they look like so he can name them. Maybe that's just my interpretation, but I think if that is the case, because like language, especially when you speak English is a lot more direct, and like there's not too much like meaning behind what you say a lot of times. But when you are speaking like a lot of languages, like Middle Eastern, like I would say Middle Eastern languages, a lot of older languages in general, a lot of things have like multiple meanings. A lot of things are just like, it can go a lot more based off the feel, like, and things are just brought more into like imagination. They're not meant to be taken literally, every word. You don't take every word literally. Some things are just more like expressions. So I believe this is not a literal translation of the ground, out of the ground formed every animal. I don't believe those are direct literal translations, but again, I may be wrong. So let's see.
This chapter appeared on separate days, but now seem to have been created simultaneously. Adam names each animal, but can't seem to find a suitable companion among them. So God puts Adam to sleep, removes one of his ribs, and fashions it into a woman. Now, there's controversy surrounding the translation of the word Selah to rib, as many of you have informed me. I'll talk more about that sometime in the future, but for the purposes of this video, we're just gonna go with the mainstream translation. Alright, so Genesis 1 and 2 each provide contradictory accounts of creation. And even if you try and get creative with the meaning of the word day, the order of events for each story simply don't match up. Was man created before plants and animals, or after? Were men and women made together, or was Adam first and Eve second? There are a number of Jewish and Christian traditions that attempt to reconcile these issues, some of which I intend to talk about in future videos, hint hint. However, the documentary hypothesis proposes that the two creation stories are simply from two different sources that were not originally meant to coexist. Genesis 1:1 through 2:4a is attributed to P, the priestly source. As in many of the oldest creation stories, like those of Egyptian and Mesopotamian mythology, the earth begins as a formless ocean. God, referred to simply as Elohim in the Hebrew, is depicted as a distant, all-powerful being who creates simply by speaking his will, and the universe abides. The process of creation follows a distinct pattern. In the first 3 days, God creates each major domain of the cosmos: night and day, the ocean and sky, and dry land. Over the next 3 days, those domains are populated with celestial bodies, fish and birds, land animals, and finally human beings who are granted stewardship over the earth and its creations. The seventh day, where God rests, is an outlier and serves to establish the Sabbath, the Jewish holy day, using narrative to reinforce religious customs as a hallmark of the P source. Halfway through chapter 2, verse 4, we switch to the J source, who gives us another creation story. You can pat yourself on the back if the sudden use of the name Yahweh tipped you off. In J's account, the earth starts out as a barren desert. J's depiction of God is much more grounded and anthropomorphic.
Okay, so this is another part that I was thinking of here. When he says no plant of the field was yet in the earth, and no herb of the field had yet sprung up, I would actually, like, okay, maybe this is just my personal interpretation of it, and obviously it is because I'm talking right now, and I don't have a religious figure around me right now. Hey, I do have my useful charts chart though, so shout outs to useful charts. I believe that it's actually, like, as far as actual fields, like an actual field of like to grow, because when this was written, they knew about fields. They knew about how to, like, do things like grow farms, stuff like that, just like getting resources. I believe they most likely would have had a separate term for a field versus just like the earth itself, like all land. I would imagine they're actually using the word field here, but I mean, that would go against what I was saying previously. I don't know. I guess, like, this one here, would you interpret this one literally, or would you interpret this one figuratively and say the field was like more of an interpretation of the world itself? Or would you say the field was more of an interpretation of actual fields of, like, farmland, which they would have, like, when the Bible was written, they would have been well aware of. It was one of the first things we as humans did to form society. So if you ever think about a time where people were around each other, like in more than like 20 groups, they're probably using farms and they know about fields. So that's going to be a tough one for me, because now I feel like everything in there cannot be interpreted literally once again, but some things do have to be interpreted literally within the Bible. I believe this is more of a literal translation, or at least I would say this is closer to being a literal translation, in my opinion, versus the previous verse.
Instead of simply commanding Adam to exist, he takes soil and physically sculpts his body and then breathes into his nostrils to give him life. Eve, too, has to be created manually from pre-existing materials.
Okay. I mean, I guess, okay. I guess what he's saying is, like, how come the fish and all the other animals within the earth didn't need to be created with previous materials? I mean, to be fair, maybe they did and they just weren't, talked about, he may have made because I know they made it he made humans in his image, but as far as like animals, things like that, maybe he also breathed life into them, but maybe it was more like he breathed life across the earth at that point, but he specifically breathed life into them because they were the last ones. They were already, life already had, oxygen on it. He didn't need more on the whole earth. I'm just like imagining God just like above the planet, just like, so that's just me. Or he could just be like, oh yeah, boom. However he does it, finger snap. Guys, how do you feel like God does his like creation? Did he like? Do you think he's more of a snap type of deity, or like actual like blowing into it? Does he just like wave his hand across things? Is he more like a you know? Does he do something with his hands? You guys tell me. Does he just say the word? Maybe God doesn't even use hands for all I know. Maybe just maybe God just like looks and it's just like done. You know what? I feel like he might be a finger pointer. Think God may be a finger pointing deity. Just points the finger, boom, it's done. Boom, it's done. Boom, it's done. Maybe even like a bang bang, pow. Just like a double, like a pistol type of, pow. There you go. There's a miracle. There's a miracle. I don't know. You guys decide.
Give him life. Eve, too, has to be created manually from pre-existing materials. Also, plants and animals are now created specifically to serve humans, unlike in P, where they were created for their own sake, and then later humans showed up to rule over them. The J-source continues further, covering the entirety of the Garden of Eden and Cain and Abel stories, until Chapter 5, which picks up right where P left off, as if none of the other stuff happened. Now, whoever it was that put the P and J creation stories together in one manuscript obviously would have noticed the ways they conflict narratively. Probably more important to them, though, were the ways that the two sources serve to complement each other thematically. P provides a broad overview of the formation of the whole cosmos, emphasizing the structure and order God brought to it. Then J tells a more grounded story, focused squarely on humans and their relationships with each other and God. In this first example, it's pretty easy to separate the sources from each other because they're presented in distinct blocks without any intermingling. But in Genesis 37, which tells the story of the enslavement of Joseph, the situation gets more complicated as we see two sources woven together to form one narrative. The story, as presented in the complete text, goes, Joseph was out tending sheep with his older half-brothers. Afterward, he came to his father Jacob, claiming the others were misbehaving. And this is why your brothers don't want to hang out with you, Joseph. Even so, Joseph was Jacob's favorite son, and he gave him a fancy coat, causing his brothers to become jealous. Later, Joseph told his brothers about two prophetic dreams he had. One where they were all binding sheaves of wheat when suddenly his sheaf stood upright and his brothers' sheaves formed a circle and bowed to his. And another dream where the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him. The implication behind both dreams being that Joseph would one day rule over his family, something that his already jealous brothers were not super jazzed to hear. Sometime later, Jacob commanded Joseph to go supervise his brothers who were once again out tending sheep. When the brothers saw Joseph coming from afar, they decided to murder him, hatching a plan to hide his dead body in a pit and tell their father he was killed by an animal. However, Reuben, the oldest brother, heard them conspiring. He implored that they instead throw Joseph into the pit alive and avoid physically harming him in the process. That way his death wouldn't be on their hands, if only by a flimsy technicality. However, Reuben was secretly intending to come back later and rescue Joseph. When Joseph arrived, his brothers seized him and took off his fancy coat. After tossing him into a pit chosen by Reuben, they then sat down for some lunch and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites passing by on their way to Egypt. Judah then said, quote, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not let our hand be on him." Note that Judah here seems to be proposing an alternative to killing Joseph with their bare hands, even though Reuben already talked them out of that. That's why they threw him into the pit alive.
Yeah, but you are... He's saying, and not let our hand be on him. I think he's saying, like, we don't want this to be on our hands at all. Like, even if you put him in the pit and he dies, you put him in the pit. His death is still on your hands. He wouldn't die. He wouldn't have died in that pit if you wouldn't have put him into the pit. Now, slavery, in those times especially, you could just, like, say, like, yeah, maybe he's not even dead. Maybe he's just a slave. Maybe he's just going to be, like, not even like treated that badly as far as like ancient slavery times go. Or, maybe the slave owner will kill him. Who cares? Because back then it's like, hey, he's a slave. He's your property now. You do what you will. Just don't tell anybody that it was us who gave him to you. So I guess it would be further it'd be transferring the blame further along, because then you could just be like, no, we just made him a slave, but whatever happened to him during his slave time is what got him killed. So we had nothing to do with that. We put our brother into slavery. That is, I don't even know if there's anything against that within the Bible necessarily. So, there you go.
Regardless, Judah's plan is never realized, because in the very next verse, a group of Midianite merchants pass by Joseph, pull him out of the pit, and they sell him to the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites then took Joseph with them to Egypt. And we're simply not told why Joseph's brothers, who presumably would have seen all this happening, didn't intervene. Later, Reuben returned to the pit only to discover it empty, and he went to his brothers to tell them that Joseph was missing. Again, even though they all should have been right there when the Ishmaelites bought him from the Midianites. The brothers then dipped the fancy coat in goat's blood and brought it to Jacob, making him believe his son was dead. And then chapter 37 ends when, quote, the Midianites sold him, Joseph, into Egypt to Potiphar, a direct contradiction of before, where it was the Ishmaelites who bought Joseph from the Midianites, and they took him to Egypt. We see further confusion later on in the story, like in chapter 39.
That could have been, I will say that may have been a mistranslation. I'm not 100% sure because I didn't write it, but I feel like that feels a little closer to being a mistranslation.
Verse 1, where it says Potiphar bought Joseph from the Ishmaelites in accordance with the first version of events. And also in chapter 45, verse 4, where Joseph claims his brothers sold him into Egypt, even though they didn't. They planned to, but the Midianites got to him first.
But at the same time, you do have to realize his brothers put him in the situation where he got put into slavery. Like, he got sold because of his brothers. So they didn't necessarily sell him directly, but they did cause him to get sold.
So the story beats...
It's really just semantics, guys.
Chapter 37 create a problematic narrative when presented all together. However, if you pick apart the text verse by verse, they can actually be separated into two complete and fully coherent narratives. One attributed to the J source, where Joseph's brothers hate him for being their father's favorite and want to prevent the prophecy of his dreams from coming true. They hatch a plan to kill Joseph, hide him in a pit, and tell Jacob that an animal killed him. Reuben does not intercede on Joseph's behalf. They seize their brother and take off his coat, but before going any further, they see the Ishmaelites passing by. Judah proposes selling Joseph to the Ishmaelites, and they do just that. The Midianites never show up at all, and their scheme is completed when they bring Joseph's bloody coat to Jacob. All later verses referencing this specific version of events are attributed to the J source. Meanwhile, the remaining verses of chapter 37 are attributed to E, the Elohist source, and form their own version of events where Joseph's brothers are pissed at him for tattling on their misbehavior. The stuff about Joseph's dreams and his fancy coat are never mentioned. When they see Joseph coming to supervise them again, they conspire to murder him. But Reuben steps in and introduces the whole idea of throwing Joseph into a pit as part of his scheme to save his life. The brothers follow along with this plan and then go off to eat. While they're occupied, the Midianite traders come and take Joseph completely unbeknownst to anyone else. The Ishmaelites don't show up. Then Reuben discovers the empty pit and tells his brothers. And meanwhile, the Midianites sell Joseph into Egypt, a statement that now makes perfect sense in context. None of the verses of chapter 37 need to be edited or reordered to form these two narratives. You need only isolate the text attributed to each source, and you have two complete stories with no internal contradictions or loose ends. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the documentary hypothesis is a hypothesis. Until someone discovers a complete J, E, P, or D manuscript somewhere, we can't claim to know that the Pentateuch was formed this way. Among proponents of the documentary hypothesis, there are differing opinions regarding which passages should be assigned to which source and how they all ended up in the same text. And there are competing models, such as the supplementary hypothesis, which proposes that the Pentateuch originated as a single text that was gradually added to by different authors and redactors over several generations. There's also the fragmentary hypothesis, which to my understanding treats each small section of the text as potentially originating from its own source. But whatever different theories scholars subscribe to, the consensus remains that the Pentateuch in some way or another is a composite text produced by multiple authors. You'll be hard-pressed to find single authorship theories outside of religious apologetics. I should probably point out, though, that I am not a scholar, and this is by far the most complicated and potentially divisive subject I've tackled on this channel.
Bro, you're doing a great job. I don't care what anybody says. I think you did a great job on this video. And you know what? Community college, just as good as any other college. I said
Going
it.
much deeper would be biting off more than I can chew, so instead I'll just recommend some reliable resources if you want to learn more. On wikiversity.org, you can read the entire King James Version Pentateuch with the text color-coded based on its hypothesized source. Link in the description. The book, The Composition of the Pentateuch by Professor Joel S. Baden, presents the methodology used by modern biblical scholars to support the documentary hypothesis. He also addresses problems with earlier forms of the hypothesis and popular alternative models. Link in the description. Joel Baden also did a great hour-and-a-half long interview on this same subject, which you can watch on the Digital Hammurabi YouTube channel. I'll leave it to you to figure out where the link is. And if you really want to dive into Hebrew Bible scholarship, there are actually a number of complete college lecture series you can watch for free on YouTube. I highly recommend Introduction to the Old Testament with Yale professor Christine Hayes, as well as The Hebrew Bible presented by Dr. Richard Elliott Friedman, who, by the way, is hilarious.
Moses walks into a psychiatrist's office. He says, "Doc, last night I dreamed I was the tent of meeting." He comes in the next day, says, "Doc, last night I dreamed I was the tabernacle." The doctor says, "Your problem is you're two tents."
It's kind of funny.
All of these scholars are a lot more qualified than me to talk about this stuff in detail. But they don't make goofy drawings, so I've got that going for me.
Hey, gotta take your wins. Gotta take your wins when you can. Yeah, that was a great video, guys. Pause. Shout outs to Jake W. If you haven't already, make sure you go and like his video. Make sure you comment below. Tell him I sent you. Make sure you subscribe to him. And you know what? Subscribe to me as well. Because you know what? I'm here. I'm doing this for you guys. You've been listening this far. Maybe you should check it out. I'm doing the hand things again. So like now I feel like I should be doing something with my hands. So yeah. But okay, here's my contradiction in the Bible that I thought about all the time. And that is after the flood. So guys, follow me here. It's a great flood. You know, the animals are all on the boat and everything. You guys finally find the land. You find land and you go out, and then Moses and his sons and their wives, they go out. And then the next story, they're in Egypt. That's my contradiction. How are they in Egypt? What is Egypt at this point? Egypt already has its own currency at this point. That means it's got its own history at that point. Which means how big was this flood? Because like if you guys get off the boat and are able to go into Egypt, which means Egypt has its own history, its own gods, its own religious practices at that point that aren't even like connected to Christianity or Judaism or any type of like monotheistic religion. So it's like, where did Egypt come from? You can't just bring in Egypt and then they also have their own currency. And like, you know how long it takes for currencies to get started? Like, you got to establish that. You got to be like, okay, we had a barter and trade system before, but now we have this whole dedicated currency for the situation. Where did that come from? There was just a great flood. There should be nothing here. But that's just my that's my contradiction from the Bible. If somebody can explain that to me, that'd be great as well. You guys are really good at explaining things. I love reading the comments. You guys are great at it. You know, you're knowledgeable, and I am looking for that knowledge, because where did Egypt come from? You can't just establish Egypt. Again, it's got its own history, especially when it's got its own gods and everything like that are at that time that aren't even based like in like religious aren't like based religious in the same religious practices. Like, it's not like there's a direct correlation between like Judaism and, maybe there is, I don't know, is there a direct correlation between Judaism and like the Egyptian gods and like their hierarchy and all those things, and like Christianity and the Egyptian gods? I didn't think there was, but where did Egypt come from? All right, guys. It's been a great video. Shout outs to Jake W. Again, guys, make sure you go like, comment, and subscribe on his channel. Tell him I sent you. Tell him to come subscribe to my channel. Check me out. I think that'll be great. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you like, you comment, and then you go ahead and subscribe to this channel right here, because you made it this far into the video. You might as well. And as always, guys, thank you. I love you.